The poem starts with an animal imagery. The tawny pelt of Africa or the brown fur of Africa has been disturbed through a strong wind. Kikuyu, the tribe, are said to be flies. Flies are some parasitic animals which feed on the death and destruction. The use of this image suggests the poet's disgust at the heinous act of these people. When the poet talks about the corpses that are scattered through the paradise, he tries to show the destruction of a beautiful heaven that has happened. The colonizers have been referred to as the colonial of the carrion, which is the leader of the dead flesh, a worm which feeds or relishes on the dead waste. So Kikuyu are nothing more than parasitic animals, while the colonizers are nothing more than people who relish on the dead flesh, again, which is parasitic. Thus, the violence done by both of these people are seen as one and the same thing by Derek Walcott. He does not see the difference between violence and violence. Walcott is also destroyed and angry at the statistical nature of the death of people. This utilitarian bargain suggests that there is no value of lives. Only the numbers are used for showing profit and loss. The colonial policy, henceforth, is of the profit on death and destruction. It negates the value of an individual living being, and thus it negates the value of any life at all. The white child who was hacked in bed is the event which stirs Derek Walcott to write this poem. He says that such an event cannot be justified by the use of statistics. The father or the mother who lost the child will not care if any more children were lost or not lost. The life of the child matters more than the number of children who are dead. Walcott then alludes to the Jewish Holocaust, which similarly had affected people and which showed a similar apathy that led to the destruction of millions of lives, which meant nothing. The second stanza starts with the images of a hunt. When people used to live in tribes, they used to hunt animals and birds for prey. So the image of a white ibis or a bird being chased down is shown. It is chased down through the bushes like threshing of crops by Africans. So, since the start of civilization, violence has been there alongside the rivers or the plains where beasts were tamed, another word for civilized. And thus, a similar thing happened at that time, and a similar thing is happening now. Humans now are being called beasts, Africans, and are being tamed. Derek Walcott says that the violence of animal on animal is the law of nature. For food and survival, it happens. But what about the man's violence? How is the violence of man, which is neither for food nor for survival, justified? Walcott says that humans find divinity as an excuse for their violence. Now, what does the word divinity means? First of all, it means God. The very idea of the white man's burden is something which is used as a divine purpose by the civilized people to inflict this senseless violence on the so-called uncivilized native people. The second meaning is to become divine or powerful. So, to become divine, to become powerful, to have the resources of these people, to enslave them is something which makes these people, these colonizers, feel powerful. And thus, this violence is done for pleasure, not for a divine purpose as it is said to be. So, this upright man seeks this divinity by inflicting pain on these other human beings. Walcott says that when beasts or animals are afraid of violence, they become delirious or feverish and they start acting very differently in a weird manner. And in a very similar way, when man is made afraid of something, some violence, man acts in a weird, different manner and becomes afraid and starts a war. The natives, the Africans, or especially the Kikuyu tribes, he says, are afraid of these people, the colonizers. He says that just as the beasts which were at one time hunted down by people, just as these beasts were afraid of these people and thus attacked in a mindless way, humans also, when they are chased and when they are hunted, they attack in a mindless way, which is called war. Now, this war dances to the tightened carcass of a drum. This refers to the use of the human skin. Generally, the skin of one of the people, these people, the other tribe has defeated, they used to make drums out of these skin. So basically, these drums were then resounded in the war cries. So the very war cry is being done on the dead flesh of a human. How can such a war be in any way divine or heroic? Walcott says that these people then call this fear, this dread, to be heroic and courage, while he calls courage still that native dread of the white peace contracted by the dead. He says that these people are afraid of the white peace, the violence which the white commit in the name of spreading light and civilization, which, like a disease, was contracted by their dead friends and family members. And so, there is no white peace, there is no civilization that is happening, there is no light which is being brought in this place, and neither is there a courage in violently fighting against these people. So, Walcott exposes both the native as well as the whites who promulgate violence. In the third stanza, Walcott begins with the word again. This shows that this which is happening, this violence which is happening now, has happened since ages. The napkin of civilization is the white man's burden, as well as the bravery which these native people show. The brutish necessity which he talks about is the necessity of power, of control. Colonization for him is a dirty cause. Our compassion, he says, is as wasted as it was in the Spanish War. Because once dead, what is the point of compassion? Compassion should be given to people who are alive so that they can be saved from a bad circumstance. Once the person is dead, the compassion has no motive, the compassion has no end. It is like a dog without teeth, it cannot bite. He refers to Africans as gorillas and whites as supermen, using the very terminology the whites use against the civilized. He says that he is poisoned with the blood of both, by which he means that because both are violent, because both are evil sides, he, having a double heritage, does not know who to take care of, who to side with. His blood is both white and black because of his grandparents, and so is his identity. It is a split identity. He does not belong to one side. He is a hybrid man. So, both of his sides are committing violence, and thus both of the sides poison his blood. He who has always been vocal against the violence done by the civilized so-called colonizers, how can he be silent against the violence committed by the natives? He does not see a side to violence. This situation leaves him in anxiety with the current situation. He says he can't look away from Africa because it is his very root, his essence of existence. And he cannot look away from the violence either. So what does he do? He does not have an answer. How should he live? The title can be interpreted in two ways. The first is that as the poetic persona is living far from Africa, Derek Walcott does not live in Africa. The cries of agony and pain he is hearing is coming from a very far place. Interpretation can be as, since Derek Walcott is living far away from his roots in Africa, the cries which are in his heart are coming from a place far from Africa. And thus, the identity crisis emerges in the title of the poem. The theme of the poem. Derek Walcott's A Far Cry from Africa emerges from the crisis of his split identity. It performs the identity and anxiety the poetic persona suffers from, whilst the horror that African terrain has become. He sees the horror and the suffering of the colonization and the violent war against it. He, being a colored man with grandparents who were both black, that is his grandmothers, and white, that is his grandfathers, carries a heritage with himself that he can't deny or look away from. He speaks the colonizer's tongue, but right for the sympathizes with the African suffering. He lives with the black Catholics, but follows Methodist faith. He is in the true sense a nowhere man. He despises violence which represents power, lust, and fear, and nothing more for him. In the first stanza of the poem, through images, Derek Walcott engages our senses to the devastation and death that has become the predicament of Africa. He shows us how apathetic we as people have become, who are happy counting the numbers of lives lost and never evaluating how precious a life actually is, and thus how horrible the loss of even one life is. Walcott introduces us to the chief motive of the poem, that is the death of an innocent white child, which stirs him to write this poem. In the second stanza, Derek Walcott moves into the past, looks into the ritualistic animal killings, and shows how humans, with all his shows of civilization, is really worse than an animal. He chides both the colonizers and the colonized who are partaking in this violence. In the last or the third stanza of the poem, Derek Walcott brings up the theme of the poem, the identity crisis that was ignited in him by the death of the white child, and the brutish nature of man. He questions his heritage and his stand on this issue.